Welcome to Shez Who, your top spot for politics. And we're ever growing here. Now we're at 197 subs. So definitely subscribe to this channel more. Like this video, comment your opinions, and let's get Shez Who still ever growing. Now here's to the folks that keep this channel growing, including the Dissent Agenda, which is the StreamYard account with which that I'm basing the Shez Who channel on, of course. They have a great podcast hosted by Melissa Lucasen and Cody Connor. So look up the Dissent Agenda, subscribe to them as well. I also want to shout out Mr. Farley Perkins, helped me along over the years. Also helped me find some great venues to host debates and stuff. So look up Mr. Farley Perkins if you have any insurance needs in Hampton Roads. If you're looking for some great food, Ellen's Home Style Barbecue Express with a location in Portsmouth is fantastic, and a location across from Virginia University in Virginia Beach. Great stuff there as well. And for a good dessert after that, head on out to ELG Sweet Boutique here in Portsmouth for some great shakes and ice creams and things. Also want to help a good friend, Mr. Seiko Varner at Positive Vibes Incorporated. Look him up because he can help you with some credit fixes, lending of money, debt consolidation, great stuff like that. He also created the Hampton Roads Green Book, a great application if you're looking for Black-owned businesses throughout the Hampton Roads area. So look up the Hampton Roads Green Book, brought to you by Mr. Seiko Varner. Last but not least, the Black Swan podcast, The Chronicles, run by Andrea Dixon-Chisvener, my lovely and awesome, very talented wife. Look on Spotify and Substack for the Black Swan Mindset, The Chronicles. Now, tonight is going to be another breakdown of the Virginia elections with two prominent Virginia politicos, Sam Shirazi and Marcus Calabrese. Sam Shirazi is a Virginia political analyst. He lives in Arlington. He hosts the Federal Fallout podcast, and I just listened to a few of those episodes today on Apple Podcast. His shows have specialized in the recent Virginia elections. Marcus Calabrese is a Hampton Roads resident, founder of Image Capital Group. He specializes in helping branding, public relations, and consulting on political campaigns as well, having helped notables like Delegate A.C. Cardoza and Governor Glenn Youngkin. So both gentlemen have great insights as to what we just saw in the past elections. And let's bring them on right now. Mr. Sam, Mr. Marcus, hope you guys are doing well tonight. Thank you for jumping on the show. Let's get in with the very first question, which, starting on public sentiment, going into November 4th, what would you say were like the biggest things, 2 to 3 things on the minds of Virginia voters? And let's begin with Mr. Sam.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So obviously my podcast called Federal Fallout. So I think the shutdown was a big deal in Virginia, as we all know. Earlier in the year, DOGE and the federal cuts, I think, were a big deal. And I think, like in 2024, economy, cost of living, inflation, those were the big topics. Not a huge surprise. I think most elections, economy is important. This election, because of, where Virginia is, the impact of the federal government, I think that was ultimately what helped the Democrats get the big win in Virginia. Not super complicated, but I think it was just another reminder that there's the old adage, it's the economy stupid. I think Democrats found it out the hard way in 2024, and I think Republicans found it out the hard way in 2025.
How much would you second that, Mr. Marcus?
Oh yeah, I would second that literally 100%. I think that they were looking for anything that would take them away from what the shutdown was doing, from long food bank lines. They were just looking for an alternative. They were looking for one of the political parties to really look like they were concerned. And the Republican Party really did not hold that title this time around.
All right. Now I want to begin with you, Marcus, on this one. I recall reading every county in Virginia, even the ones that still voted Republican overall, moved at least a little closer to the Democrat side of the aisle. Does this mean a relatively sizable wave happened for Democrats?
Explain your question again.
Every county, I read this, that every county in Virginia at least partially moved closer to the Democrat side, even if they still won Republican. The margin was much closer this time. So, how overall large would you say was this relative Democrat wave?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the other consultants that I was working with on the Republican side said it feels like sometimes Democrats just pull voters out of the woodworks. But I think a lot of times it's a lot of the literally, like Sam just said, the old saying is the economy's stupid. When that pressure is on, that pressure pulls a lot of voters out of the woodwork. So I think that's what really made it such a, not even a wave. I mean, it was, I think everyone expected Democrats to do very well. But I think that margin was just a lot bigger than what people expected.
Would you follow the same, Mr. Shirazi?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all valid points. I mean, the thing I would add is, as much as the Democrats, want to think, everyone loves the Democrats. They got this huge win in Virginia. The reality is Virginia swings election to election, especially these governor's election. There's always a swing against the party in the White House. We saw it in 2021. Now we saw it in 2025. So I wasn't necessarily surprised that every part of Virginia had a little bit of a swing. Obviously, there were different sizes in different places. But, 2021, Glenn Youngkin moved Virginia about 12 points from when Joe Biden won it in 2020. This time, Spanberger moved it about 9 points from where Harris won it in 2024. So it's just the nature of the beast in some ways in these elections, that there are huge swings against the party in the White House. And that's just kind of a thing Virginia always does for some reason.
Now, would you say that there would also be, as much as there is a greater Democrat enthusiasm this year, there's also a measurable Republican malaise this year. Did you see that, Mr. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I think those things go hand in hand. I mean, usually when the party in the White House, they get complacent, they're just not as fired up as the opposition. You see that almost every single time, Democrat, Republican. I think this time we saw that more so in places like Southwest Virginia. The turnout really was lower in Southwest Virginia than it was compared to other parts of Virginia. And you could argue, maybe it's just those people weren't as engaged. You could argue maybe that's, whatever reason. And I think that's one of the things the Republicans will have to think about for the midterms, these kind of low propensity voters that like Donald Trump, but don't always show up in these off-year elections. How are the Republicans going to get them off the couch and going to vote next year in the midterms?
And Marcus, as someone who's been around a little bit more of the Republican circles, did you get a sort of sense that there was a malaise going on?
I wouldn't necessarily call it a malaise. That's not a bad term, but I would say a lot of, I think, Republican voters and a lot of independents who might be open to voting Republican definitely felt cut off. They felt ignored. When you look at the difference between, so I worked on Governor Bob McDonnell's and Governor Glenn Youngkin's campaign, and I was close enough to see with Winsome Sears' campaign. Very strong on the evangelical tone, very strong on the hard conservative tone. Republicans really tried to set a tone that Democrats were hateful, Democrats were angry. Nobody wants to hear that. Voters, independents, in general, especially Democrats, people are concerned, people are scared, and people have their right to feel however they feel. When I worked on Glenn Youngkin's campaign, there was an obvious difference. Glenn Youngkin put a lot of effort into making sure that the message didn't alienate people. It really didn't seem to be the case with this. Even when the lieutenant governor nominee was decided, John Reed, there was a lot of Republicans who really didn't mind John Reed, but the party itself was kind of fractured with that. A lot of them felt Winsome Sears was too conservative, so there was some fracturing with that. Very, very different compared to the last two Republican nominees who won for governor. Winsome Sears wasn't that out in the open when she ran for lieutenant governor. She was very, very public, but she was not anywhere near, front and center. She was not the standard bearer. So I think that's That was, you have a party typically seen to be primarily white,
Mhm.
primarily evangelical, but um, again, that first part, primarily white, is a big deal. And then you have a black woman at the top, and then you have a gay man as lieutenant governor nominee. There are going to be some Republicans who are not a fan of that. Now, at the same time, from my involvement, from what I had seen, a lot of the party itself, the base of the party, really didn't mind either of those things. But you did not have someone with a big tent message. You didn't see them, even if you look at where they went. It was not a big tent approach. It was not a let's reach out to the community. I think he went to 2 or 3 food banks when he ran for governor. I didn't see anyone on the Republican side do that this time, especially at a time when food bank lines are long. Nobody went. It's very tone deaf.
This would have been the time to head out the food banks, especially right in the middle of the shutdown.
Mhm.
Which leads me to my next thought, and I think you'd be the one to start with this one. Would you say that Terry relatively was worse than Abigail and Glenn was relatively better than Winsome?
Oh, by far. But I don't have to say that. The voters said that.
Mhm.
The voters made that abundantly clear. I think Terry assumed he would be governor because he had been, and he slipped up on that. I think the lieutenant governor felt very confident, almost ordained, that she would be governor. I think she slipped up on that. I think she missed a large portion of the electorate. Obviously, that the voter results prove that. But I think she missed a large audience by not thinking she could lose. Hillary didn't think she could lose either.
Mm-hmm.
She's sitting at home.
Yep, she's been at home for many a year now. So there's that. Now, I want to move it a little bit to the Jay Jones section of the race. Would you say, Mr. Marcus, and we'll bring Sam on in a second, that that was kind of an actual nothing burger, or was the wave too big, or did people nowadays just sort of shrug off such controversies after seeing precedents with Trump over the past decade?
Yeah, I think the precedents with Trump was a huge factor because it let people feel kind of justified. But I mean, the wave was so big. It's interesting because there's really a lot of people that I've spoken to that feel like there's no reason in the world Jay Jones should have won, considering Jason Miyares was one, the incumbent. 2, Jason Miyares hadn't had any type of scandal or any type of negativity about him in the press or his office. Maybe someone might disagree with him on policy, but I don't think anyone could really say he was a negative force in that office. But then you have someone who literally said something like what Jay Jones did that would have cost anyone the race. But I think that wave was so big, and the precedent of President Trump having said so many just distasteful things, I think it gave him a huge buffer. There was a significant vote drop off when you look at Lieutenant Governor and Jay Jones, but it was enough to save him. And I think a lot of people weren't concerned about that. They wanted to send a message, and they did.
I would agree. It just seems like these types of controversies aren't as controversial because now people are more entertained by them. They're not appalled by them.
Yeah.
If that were to make sense. Now, let's look at Virginia Beach, for example. We saw some really good Democrat turnout, and it looks like the bottom of the Republican ticket won versus the top of the ticket, as Miyares defeated Reed, but Reed also defeated Winsome. Did the top of the ticket, and beyond places than just Virginia Beach, hurt the entirety of the Republican ticket?
Yeah, there was when you again compare the difference between Governor Youngkin and just this race alone, or Governor Bob McDonnell. Governor Bob McDonnell won with a 10-point spread. When the I know they say heavy is the head that wears the crown, but the top of the ticket has a huge factor on how the rest of the ticket goes. That's why they call them in. Before when Winsome Sears had her previous campaign manager that was publicized for making $17,000 a month and nothing was being done, there were a lot of Republicans who didn't really want the top of the ticket present. Every man for himself. But then when they finally switched the campaign manager and they had a new team take over, then it ended up becoming a little bit more of a team effort. But yeah, that top of the ticket is a huge deal. The numbers bear that out.
Would you second that, Mr. Sam? I know you just got back here, but the question was in relation to, I'm pointing out Virginia Beach here, that Miara's got more votes than Reed, and Reed got more votes than Winsome. Is that like a top-down thing where it sort of ruined the entirety of the ticket?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to run out with kids. You know how it is. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Winsome Earl Sears certainly made some mistakes during the campaign, or her campaign made mistakes. So I think it's hard to deny that. But at the same time, I think the environment was very difficult for her. And, you could argue, okay, on a better night, she might have lost by 10. But there was no way that she was going to lose, I think, less than 10. I think it's just the reality was the environment this year was just so bad for Republicans. The one thing, I don't want to go too hard on Sears because I think it's easy to kind of scapegoat her and say, oh, it's all her fault. But one thing that I think everyone agrees was just kind of was out there was all the focus on the trans stuff. And I think at some point people were like, everyone, including Republicans, were like, I don't know why you're spending so much time on this. I do think if she had like a smarter campaign, maybe more focused on the economy, less trans stuff, maybe it could have gotten closer to 10%. And not to say that's not important. I don't think it would have saved Miyares, but certainly for the House of Delegates, maybe it could have saved some delegates. So long story short, I mean, I do think the Sears campaign has some things that they did wrong, but at the same time, I also want to kind of realize like the environment was really bad for her, and there was not a whole lot she could do to salvage things. And at the end of the day, like for whatever reason, they chose the trans issue, and they thought that was gonna maybe, if I had to guess, they thought it would get the base out, and maybe it did. I mean, maybe fewer people would have showed up on the Republican side if they didn't do that. But I just think, in hindsight, economy was the top issue. She spent very little time talking about the economy. And I think that was essentially why you saw the 15-point loss as opposed to maybe 9 points, which is what Gillespie lost by in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I'm remembering some of those commercials where it literally copied the Trump commercials about Kamala was for they, them, and they just ripped it off and then used it again this year. And that's a type of topic that wasn't even that popular last year, and this year it's even much less popular to generate Republican turnout. And I'm also curious because I want to hear your take on the Jay Jones. He won pretty big, but was he still nonetheless hurt by that scandal, or was it not really much of a scandal because we're sort of inoculated from this type of stuff because of years and years of seeing Trump say horrible stuff too, and he still succeeds?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt that scandal hurt Jay Jones. I mean, he would have gotten a bigger win, probably closer to what Hashmi got if that didn't come out. And there were I heard a lot of voters who ended up voting for him saying things like, I didn't like what he did, but obviously Trump has done the XYZ. So I do think in some ways, having Trump there was always going to, ultimately carry the day for Jay Jones. And I'll be curious to see what happens going forward, because ultimately the voters gave him a second chance. And I do think, particularly because he got a majority, I think that was a question mark. Could he get above 50%? He got a majority of the vote. I think, I don't think it's a completely clean slate, but typically after you win an election, it can fix a lot of problems. We saw that with Donald Trump when he won the election. People gave him space. He was the president, despite a lot of the stuff in his past. So I'm curious to see if going forward, Jay Jones, if he does a job as Attorney General, he focuses on that. Does he potentially kind of move past this? And does it become kind of old news? Because at the end of the day, it hurt him, but it didn't end up making the ultimate difference.
Marcus, I want to lead with you on this next one because you've also done some help with some of the delegate races. But man, there was a big, 13 plus seats flipped from Democrat over the Republican. You had your eyes on the ground in some of the races. Can you give some of your opinions on maybe the entirety of the flipping and some of the special races you got to see directly? Any surprises that you might have seen along the way?
Well, so actually last year before the presidential election, I was at an event and one of the consultant from UVA, I think Larry Sabato, was talking about the presidential race, and actually Delegate Phil Hernandez said it. He called it out. He said if Trump won the election, the Democrats would win. I think he said 30 seats, but he might have said 13 seats. But he called it out. Then he said if President Trump won the election, then Democrats are going to sweep the next election. He was absolutely right. But I think it still goes to the same thing. A lot of people really just wanted to send a message more than anything else. And they were out for it. Any voter who was paying attention, and even more so for voters who felt it, they're seeing a lot of job loss unnecessarily. They're seeing a lot of economic pressure unnecessarily, just because they feel like, not even feel like, it's obvious that Republicans have not been doing a good job of relieving any type of economic pressure. They didn't talk about any of it. They really didn't. No one came out with a new plan. Even if you look at the debate between Spanberger and Sears, even then, no one came out with any kind of plan. No one really spoke about anything. Winsome was hard on Abigail, do you have nothing else to say? And Abigail Spanberger just kind of stood there. But no one came out with a new idea. No one came out with anything that really addressed these issues. But as far as the delegates, I think they really just rode that wave. And now if you look at something like Bloxham and some of those other seats that are kind of really so gerrymandered, and Bloxham has been in that seat for a minute, and even before it was redistricted, he had been in that seat for a minute. Again, a lot of voters weren't even really looking for why they should vote a certain way. They really just voted with their feelings, and their feelings were merited. Mm-hmm. You can't say they weren't merited. They were absolutely merited. But let's be honest, when all these things are going on, people aren't really thinking about the policies that their delegates are talking about. They're not. Even if you look at, for instance, the Portsmouth Commonwealth Attorney's race, you look at some of those races, three solid candidates in that race. They literally were voting in a wave. You look at Delegate A.C. Cardoza, who I did work with, and it was a little weird. We don't have to go too much into it. Mm-hmm. You have two candidates, and we actually debunked their attack ad. There was a horrible attack ad, horrible. Like, it made it look like he should have been a guest on SVU. Horrible attack ad. And the news ran the story several times that said, hey, this isn't true. And Cardoza still lost. So voters don't always look at line by line, detail by detail. Sometimes it's the economy, stupid. It's they're voting with their feelings. Their feelings are merited. And they're voting out of their own personal experience. And no one was speaking to that, not in large margin. They really weren't. Abigail did better than that, but really no one was speaking to that.
Mr. Sam, you recently did a show that was really good on recapping the 13 flips. And I'm curious how much you were able to comment on things that you did not expect as of maybe a couple of days going into the elections. What could you speak on that you have seen and digested post the election results?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much what Marcus said. I mean, to build on that, what surprised me were some of the flips at the end where, I thought probably the Democrats would get up to 60, but I did not expect 64. And I think one of the surprising results was in the Spotsylvania area, where the dean of the House of Delegates, Bobby Orak, has been there since 1989. He lost. And I think it was just, Spanberger carried so many of these districts at the top of the ticket. There was some ticket splitting at the House of Delegates level. But to Marcus's point, I mean, people were just sending a message. They wanted to vote straight ticket to, for whatever reason, probably to, express frustration at the economy or to express frustration at the Trump administration. And, I think some of these delegates had stronger brands, some of them had weaker brands, but at the end of the day, it didn't really matter because people were just sending a message. And, the opposite happened in 2021. I mean, there were a bunch of flips that were pretty unexpected in 2021 because people were frustrated with the Democrats. And that's kind of what happens. And, it might not seem like it fair in a sense because, some of these delegates, they may have worked hard for the districts, but at the end of the day, like, I think we've really gotten to the point of the nationalization of politics where a local delegates race shouldn't really be about national politics, but it's essentially become a referendum on Trump, and that's just the reality. And so, anyways, long story short, I mean, I think that getting to 64 really just showed me that people were frustrated. They wanted to send a message, and they did it up and down the ticket. That's why Jay Jones won, and yeah, that's why we got a complete blue wave in Virginia.
And Mr. Sam, would you say the shutdown, especially in the past 2 to 3 weeks, as SNAP was starting to get threatened, did that also really played a part in just the increasing sentiment? It wasn't just about being anti-Trump. It's now also anti-shutdown. And what can the Democrats do to reverse something like that? How much do you think that played into it?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt, particularly in Northern Virginia and where you are, Hampton Roads, shutdown has a big impact on the economy. And, I think the Republicans really never really had a coherent message on the shutdown. Some of the Republicans were saying, well, like, who really cares? These are mainly Democrats, which obviously isn't a great attitude to have towards the shutdown. Other Republicans were like, well, the shutdown is actually the Democrats' fault. And probably that would be a stronger argument if you could kind of make it stick. But I think the overall problem with that was, whatever you want to say about President Biden, there was never a shutdown when he was in office because he didn't mind making backroom deals. He didn't mind compromising with the Republicans. So there was never a shutdown. And so I think for a lot of Americans, instead of the details about what is this shutdown about, they just kind of saw, oh, Trump is back. There's another shutdown. The last big shutdown was under Trump. So I think it's just, again, that association with Trump, things not necessarily going right in DC, that hurts the Virginia economy. So, I think that all kind of was part of the equation. And, ultimately, it's hard. I don't know what the Virginia Republicans could have done other than maybe trying to take this more seriously. And it doesn't mean they're going to have necessarily the greatest, message on it. But I do think for a lot of voters, there was a sense for the Republicans to kind of just dismiss the shutdown or dismiss people's concerns. And, it is a big deal in Virginia, and you can't pretend like, hundreds of thousands of workers, not getting paychecks is not going to impact the election.
I think, Marcus, you might second that as someone who knows Hampton Roads as well as I do. Federal shutdowns are really going to bring down sentiment in this area. And who is the party in power that people would think of the shutdown? The Republican Party. So because of that, did you think that also helped boost Democrats?
It certainly did. There was another consultant who said he posted that Tim Kaine and Mark Warner voting for the shutdown was going to make Winsome Sears governor. It was one of the silliest things that I had seen. I knew that it was going to hurt Winsome because a lot of people are going to look at Trump for it. And then Governor Trump, Governor Youngkin responded with Vina, which is great. That's good. But you know what voters are really sick of? They're really sick of um, people being late to the solution. That's not what people vote for. They vote for the voters might not necessarily um, say it, but one of the things that I really base my political consulting on is consideration, being considerate, right? And so if you want the job, right, whether it's governor, mayor, city council, whatever, then you should really be prepared for some of this stuff. It really should not come as that much of a surprise. So the fact that Virginia had to create something to help with food stamps, okay, fine, but why didn't we have something already? And actually, one of the suggestions, and Delegate Cardoza actually liked it. Mm-hmm. He was actually very, very, very excited about it. From my understanding, he sent it to the top of the ticket, and it fell flat. But I told him what Republicans should do to try to turn some of the sentiment was they should have said, well, if, because Republicans were blaming Democrats, Democrats were blaming Republicans. Republicans could have hit the narrative of if Democrats won't feed Virginia, then we'll do it ourselves. Now imagine if one party and their elected officials said, we're going to have a massive food drive. We're going to do it, for the rest of the 2 weeks. Please look, here's a list. Here's a link to pantries in your area. Please go volunteer or donate here. And then you see your elected officials walking in with bags of food to say, if they won't do it, then damn it, we will. I'm not saying that's a solution, but I'm saying it at least changes the dynamic to show that people care, instead that your elected officials care, instead of them saying, "Oh, we're surprised. We didn't vote for you to be surprised. We voted for you to be solution oriented," and they weren't seeing that anywhere. And because you have the top of the ticket, and nationally, you have Republicans in power. Yeah, a pox on all their houses.
And you have definite ability and experience to see, say, the AC race, and Virgil won that race, but there was also a wide disparity of money in that race. I think he raised over $3 million. Mm-hmm. I had on a couple of good candidates out in the western part of the state, Michaela Venable, Reza Hayes, Melody Cartwright. You mentioned Bloxham, his seat being a little gerrymandered, but nonetheless, that was actually a closer race. Maybe Liz Richardson, Reza Hayes, Melody Cartwright, Venable could have used a little bit more money to go their way. Is there something that you might say? I'll lead off with Sam here if you'd like to. That Abigail raised a lot more than Winsome did. We had Jay Jones outraised Miyares, Hashmi outraised Reed, of course. Did it work out the way they wanted it, or if there was a way to make it a little bit more evenly dispersed, that could help even more Democrats? Do you think that's a thing that could have happened?
Yeah, I mean, specifically the House Democrats raised a lot of money, and I think in some of the districts they frankly didn't even need it. I mean, I'm thinking about the 57th district in Western Henrico. I think Maine Navarre won by over 11%. Anyone could kind of tell you that seat was going to flip. So, theoretically, the Democrats could probably have given more money to these other candidates. I think in hindsight, frankly, they could have been more ambitious and targeted more seats. They had already targeted 14 seats. So I think they were feeling like, okay, we've taken on a lot already. And so they didn't want to go overboard. I'll be curious to see in 2027, some of the seats that you mentioned, maybe the Democrats would be willing to kind of spend the money there. They'll have to have a lot of defense. So I'm a little bit skeptical they're going to go all in on every single seat. But I do think, usually that happened in 2017 where the Democrats just missed a few seats and they won them in 2019. I wonder if, maybe some of the seats you're talking about, the Democrats might be willing to throw some more money in 2027.
Mr. Marcus, would you second that money in politics nonetheless shows its ugly head here, and perhaps Democrats could have won a little bit more, all the money was spread out a little bit, perhaps Republicans could have had a better fight if they raised more money.
Oh, for sure. If it's something as simple as you invest to get a return on that investment. Parties are very, very funny with that. A lot of times they just they're not willing to take the risk. They look at what they see they can. They literally just go by the numbers, which makes sense a lot of cases. But at the same time, they're not really willing to invest. For instance, the race in Chesapeake against Jay Leftwich. Okay, so they look at a race like that.
Shout out to Rodney.
And they say that particular race isn't worth it because of the numbers. They look at the district where the 86th where Delegate Cardoza is versus Virgil Thornton, and they say, okay, well, that's a little bit more winnable, So I mean, they really, both sides do the same thing. They just look at where they think they're going to get the best ROI.
And I want to look a little bit forward now as we get close to finishing up the questions for the night. For instance, I just read that Don Scott, my delegate, who's the speaker, is saying that Democrats are going to legislate with a bit of restraint. I don't really know what he means by that, especially with the big wave like that. You think they might be a little bit more adventurous, but Mr. Marcus, what do you think do you think is actually just sort of pulling cards a little bit close to the vest at the moment, and they actually might be a little aggressive come January time?
I do not believe in any way whatsoever that Democrats are going to legislate with restraint. I cannot imagine. I've already heard the stories from the previous session where Republicans, some of whom were respected in moderate capacity, would sit down to present their bill, and they would just say their name, read the bill number, and then the Democrats would just vote on it and without very much conversation. And so, they simple things like that. So I don't imagine a world. I think it's going to be very. I think it's going to be very much a Virginia that is run by Speaker Scott and Senator Louise Lucas. And honestly, they're both very smart, very capable, very strong people. And I'm from Portsmouth. I grew up in Portsmouth a little bit. I'm proud IC Northam graduate. But I'm not so sure that President maybe one day, Governor-elect Spanberger, I'm not so sure that Governor-elect Spanberger is going to get to be the moderate that she talked about being. I see her as a moderate, and I think that she has the talent and the capacity for it. But I think Speaker Scott and Senator Louise Lucas and some of the Democratic leadership are very excited and very eager. But if they do move about with not very much restraint, that pendulum swings, and it swings very swiftly.
Would you second, Mr. Shirazi, all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, anytime you get a trifecta, you're going to be starting to pass bills, and that's just the reality. What I got from Speaker Scott's statement was perhaps that they recognize where Virginia is, and I think it's important for both parties to not necessarily view Virginia as anything other than pretty much a middle-of-the-road state, maybe lean slightly towards the Democrats. I think sometimes the Republicans have this mentality like, we're going to make Virginia a red state again, which I don't think it's going to happen. And then you have some Democrats who want to make Virginia like super blue state, like Massachusetts, which is not going to happen. So I think both Spanberger and Speaker Scott are kind of in the mode of trying to keep Virginia where it is in the sense of kind of vibe of the type of state it is. However, as Marcus points out, once you get a trifecta, you have bills lined up. They are going to push them through. We'll see how aggressive they get on some of the bills, but I do think there's going to be some interesting things happening. And I think the more interesting question will be 2027, because I think the check on power right now is the state Senate. Now, it's 21-19. Hashemi's going to break the tie. So it's not like, Democrats don't have a strong majority in the Senate, but after 2027, there's a potential the House could get even more Democratic. The Senate will certainly get more Democratic in all likelihood. So, this is going to be a 4-year long conversation, if I had to guess. So we'll see how they start off, but I'd be curious to see what they end up doing, maybe after the 2027 elections, if the Democrats get another big win.
I'm thinking here a little bit more, again, about the future of some of the notable politicians right now. I see Bryce Reeves has already declared to run for against Mark Warner. But do you think he'll have a primary that will be alone, like Abigail did this year? And do you hypothetically think you might get another big name? Perhaps Glenn, like other governors, would want to try to run for Senate, Mr. Sam.
So, I mean, I think realistically, after the results on last Tuesday, I mean, I don't think Glenn Youngkin is going to be in the mood to run for Senate. My guess is Bryce Reeves is probably going to be the biggest name that throws his hat in the ring. I'm guessing, probably have a primary. I don't know. If I had to guess, he'll probably be the nominee. I could be wrong about that. And at the end of the day, like, it's going to be tough because midterms are always hard for the party in power. Virginia specifically swings against the party in the White House. So, if I had to guess, going back to Marcus's point, the party spending money, I don't think the Republicans are going to spend, frankly, any money in Virginia in 2026 for the Senate. I think they are going to focus on saving some of their incumbents, trying to save the majority. They are not going to be on offense in 2026. So, again, another reason why Glenn Youngkin wouldn't run. Probably Bryce Reeves is going to be the nominee unless someone comes out of the woodwork and, becomes kind of this Tea Party hero and kind of wins that way. But long story short, I just don't think the Senate race is going to be that big of a deal next year in Virginia.
Do you have similar thoughts there, Mr. Marcus?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think Sam hit the nail on the head. I would be. I wouldn't be surprised if a mayor or a former mayor or a former congressman or someone saw it as an opportunity where they could get the nomination and think that they could be the savior of the Republican Party. But against Mark Warner, yeah, that's a tough road to hoe. Bryce Reeves does have a very solid background, so it'll definitely be a worthwhile conversation. It's not going to be, no one should ever. I always believe that you should try your best not to underestimate your opponent. And I don't think Mark Warner would do that. But I think it's going to be a substantial conversation. Bryce Reeves is a law enforcement officer, military background. So it'll be a conversation worth having. But I don't imagine someone like, Jason Miyares or Winsome looking for a comeback, or Governor Youngkin just finished being one of one. I don't think he wants to be one of 100.
Makes sense. Well, how about a little bit of some final thoughts, Mr. Marcus, just about the elections and what you see going into next year?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting. I was talking to one of the Republican consultants that I work with. They're concerned that the Republican Party in Virginia is going to be like the Democratic Party of Mississippi, kind of just there for show. And I could see that to a point, but at the same time, I always believe it's always good to have some type of forced compromise. I think that's where you get the best work done. So it'll be interesting to see if the Republicans do mount a comeback. They're going to need another Glenn Youngkin, or they're going to need another Bob McDonnell. But Bob McDonnell ran for governor as attorney general, and right now the Republicans don't have anyone on deck. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think Sam is right. I think it's going to be a 4-year conversation, but it's going to be a lively one, because even though Virginia looks blue right now, I would still say it's purple, because again, it doesn't take a lot for voters to feel like, again, they vote. I don't think they voted necessarily off of the substance of policies. They voted off the substance of personal experiences and mood change. So it'll be interesting to see how Democrats manage that mood that they got, the momentum. It'll be interesting to see.
And Mr. Sam, what are your final thoughts on the elections you just had and what you might foresee in the next year or so?
Yeah, so I appreciate you having me on. Marcus had some really good insights, and I appreciate that he kind of seems to have gotten the message the voters sent. And I'll be curious to see, do the Republicans change course at all? Do they kind of get this, get why the elections didn't go well last Tuesday? And also at the same time, do the Democrats build on their success, and do they not necessarily get overconfident? Because I do think there is a temptation when you win a big election to the next election just assume, oh yeah, we're entitled to win. The country is moving our way, and nothing is predetermined in politics. 2021, Glenn Youngkin gets this big win. Republicans feel good. There wasn't the red wave in 2022 everyone thought was coming. Various reasons for that, but I think the Democrats cannot just assume, oh yeah, 2026 is going to be this huge blue wave. A lot of things can change. The Republicans are going to adapt. There's going to be, a lot of stuff going on. And so I think the Democrats, while they had a good night, it's one night in a couple states. And, frankly, they're blue leaning states. And where the Democrats have to win next year are more purple, more red. And I don't want to kind of assume automatically the Democrats are on the way to kind of winning majorities in Congress just because they had a good night in this November. So anyways, that's what keeps politics interesting. You never, it's unpredictable. I think that's the one thing that's always fun about elections and politics is you think you know what's going on, but it always surprises you. And even in this year in Virginia, we thought Democrats would do well. They did better than we expected. And maybe they'll do well next year, but we can't take it for granted one way or the other.
And I'm glad to be getting as much great information from both you gentlemen tonight. Thank you personally for coming on the show. I want to shout out Image Capital Group. If you're looking for a little great branding, look for Mr. Marcus Calabrese at Image Capital Group. And also follow Sam Shirazi around at Federal Fallout Podcast, Apple Podcast. I'll listen to some great stuff today. It's good stuff. I look forward to hearing more from you guys both in the future. And again, thank you for coming on tonight. You guys have a great night.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye.
This has been another great Shiz Who, where you're going to learn all about the politics of Virginia that you need to know. Thank you to both of those gentlemen. And I hope you guys have a great night. I'll catch you next time, and subscribe to Shiz Who.